What I've been working on this semester is part of a larger book project that I'm working on, which is originally entitled Information Warriors with a $ rather than an S, the business of online political media. And so part of my frustration has been in the past that oftentimes when we're looking at changes in political communication and what new media is doing, we're looking at how those changes in online political communication impact legacy institutions. So how it's impacting journalism in the way they cover politics, it's impacting how politicians are how politicians are trying to do outreach to media actors. And so for me, what's interesting is the rise of the other. And if I was thinking of a better, I actually thought I would rename my talk probably Occupation Other, the economy of political new media. But hindsight is 2020. So this is just a brief sort of sketch of how we I think, traditionally understand political communication. We think about political actors, and I was worried about time, so that's actually Putin riding a tiger. But all sorts of actors. They could be politicians, they could be states, they could be advocacy groups. Utilize this whole mess of PR, marketing, campaign consultants to basically get messages into the media and new media, which are obviously overlapping, and then to reach constituents. And so more and more that is, that is much smaller than it looked like on my computer. But more and more that is, highly distributed, and we used to talk about how the fact that the internet connectivity was low, but particularly now this is just a global accounting. We can look at how time spent on screens, whether they be TV, internet, cell phones, is really that trend is expanding worldwide. And so when you talk about sort of getting your messages out in the new media world, you're really talking about moving it into a networked media environment. And I'll talk a little bit more about the networked media environment in a minute. But what I'm interested in is sort of this group of actors on the margins of this process that I think are really expanding. And so these information warriors are basically, they're providers, they're mercenaries, they're people for hire. And some of them might have serious political sort of ideologies and believe in what they're doing. And others might see this as a business opportunity, but they're funded by political groups, states, activists, and businesses. And some operate as what we call the state's 501c3s, so nonprofits. Some are just get a combination of advertising dollars, and others have a particular service to sell. And so I did a talk earlier in the semester where I was really talking about organizations that are employed by nation states across borders. And today I'm really going to focus on the tactics and the activities that are employed by a group of actors that might tell you that they're journalists, but you can tell me what you think. I think that particularly as these sort of concentric circles get blurred, it's important to have sort of definitional clarity. And I think that definition, that lack of clarity, is really a product of the networked media environment. And so by the networked media environment, this is just sort of a general overview, but we talk about networked media environments. I think one of the most important things is the rise of aggregators. And so we have this rise of aggregators, and this is actually global ranking. The top 3 sites in terms of actual unique traffic are all aggregators. Huffington Post has its own unique content, but it really started out as an aggregator, and its main job is to provide links to other places on the web. And so this is my Twitter handle, but so say I, as a person, wanted to sort of insert content into this sort of networked media environment. Not saying anybody wouldn't pay attention, but if I used the right tactics and I had the right thing to say, I could get it to something like Global Voices, who might be covered by the radio. Somebody might pick that up, a blogger somewhere else might pick that up from the radio, and it filters on out. And so, there's organizations, particularly the Dredge Report, which I'll come back to, which has been incredibly important in terms of these networked media tactics. But increasingly, this doesn't mean that it stops at sort of the new media world or even traditional media in the way that we think about it. You don't have to have a smartphone. This is an example of a social media network that is available on regular sort of Nokia phones. It's called Mixti, and it's South African. So this is an example of sort of the very simple user interface, but you can actually send messages and deliver news and information to a whole host of followers, as long as you can get them to follow you. And things like that are increasingly important because you can look at mobile penetration across countries, regardless of your developing or undeveloped, or developing or developed, is reaching nearly 100%. So traditionally, political economy of media looks at things like, we look at media institutions, and you look at things like spectrum, how a spectrum is allocated between different organizations, how resources are allocated, how audiences are allocated. And you look at these sort of measures of potential voters, purchasers, constituents, and you try to understand how these different media institutions operate, what drives them, in terms of sort of the traditional sort of business metrics. And particularly critical political economists will look at things like allocational scarcity, economic scarcity, attention scarcity, but generally, money is the bottom line. And what the group of actors that I'm going to talk about today, I think that is different, which doesn't necessarily describe them. They are an industry, and they provide similar services. They are doing it for money, but they're never going to be News Corporation. They're never going to be Disney. It's not about global expansion. It's really not about money for most of them, although there are some where they might see it as just a small business model. It's really about creating links, about advancing a particular political project. And so they're capitalizing on this political economy of the link. So the idea is that, yes, you want to make money enough to do your particular projects, but you want to, what really drives some of the people that I've been interviewing is not getting paid a lot of money to write an article or getting a lot of people to see their product. It's about getting a link on Drudge Report so that all these different people see it. It's sort of like a game. It's a gaming the system to get attention. And so these are just a few quotations. And this is actually not somebody I interviewed, Jeff Jarvis. But New Rule, Cover What You Do Best, Link to the Rest is from his publication from 2007. But you see things like this all around the web, particularly if you're looking at these sort of organizations. One of the groups is really not necessarily journalists, but they're gaming the system. And so I think that these are some of the organizations that you might think of, if you're thinking about sort of duplicitous services for political actors or businesses in general. So sock puppets. Does everybody know what a sock puppet is on the internet? It's basically a fake persona. And so you can buy all sorts of fake personas, whether you're a business or a political actor. And so part of what I've been doing this semester is looking at the range of organizations around the world that are involved in selling fake Twitter followers. And so this is just, the list is really, really, really long, but this is just a small county. A lot of these are headquartered in the US, and a lot of them will close and reopen under new names. James Clegg is a British guy who actually has 13 front companies, and he changes the names all the time. And the company is actually registered under the name Bob Smith. So the company's name is Bob Smith, the parent company, and then he keeps opening up new companies all the time. Has anybody heard of Fiverr? Okay, I'll get to Fiverr in a minute. Fiverr is actually not necessarily a traditional sock puppet sales place, but it's increasingly important, particularly for the global spread of these activities. And these are, again, this is just a few, but you can just see, even though a lot of these companies are US based, it's a global marketplace. So these are just a few politicians that have been outed for buying fakes. And of course they always deny it. And this is, these are all very recent. So I have a catalog where it goes by year, but this is just a small shot, just a snapshot. But I was always amazed by David Cameron, 92% fake. Anyway. So Fiverr is an online platform where basically most things you can buy for $5. So if you want somebody to go in and help you design a website, give you advice, a lot of things will cost more than $5, but it's $5. But within Fiverr, there is an increasingly popular marketplace for basically buying and selling political services for online that I think that most people would agree are manipulative at best. And so here's one example. This gentleman, who goes by Sedeg DZ90 from Algeria, promises to get you 1 million likes on any platform that you want. But all you need to do is pay $5 to watch his video, and they'll tell you how to do it. And so that's just one example, but and there are many of these. I did this because I wanted to show how it's becoming sort of a global marketplace, but there are many that are targeted towards politicians, political actors, but there are many that are just general, but that are actually employed by politicians. And so you can buy Twitter followers, you can buy a blog post on a topic of your choice, you can buy things like, so this is just another example. I showed this actually in my previous talk, sorry for the overlap, but this is a band of professional blog warriors. You want real people who actually don't care, so I still consider them sock puppets, to go in and blog in favor of your cause. They are also available. And also there are services where you can log in and you can see who else has got fake followers. So there's also the reverse services that are coming up. So not only can you buy fakes, but you can buy services that will unmask fakes, which then you can release and sort of discredit other people. And so Yatterbox is free for journalists and politicians, but for PR and comms professionals, you have to eventually pay for it. How many people have heard of Write Online? And pardon this for being a US example, but there's a lot of US examples in this, but I think there's so many great activities that are pioneered in the US and in terms of manipulation and propaganda that are trickle outwards. But has anybody heard of Write Online? So Write Online started in 2008, and it basically was a response to the Netroots progressive annual convention that used to be called the Yearly KOS, KOS. And so basically, it was started in 2008 with funding from the Koch brothers, which, people familiar with the Koch brothers? Are illustrious corporate sponsors of the Tea Party in the United States and a number of right-wing causes. And so basically what Write Online does is it brings together major right-wing journalists, activists, and technicians with people who want to become collectivists, for lack of a better word. And so this is Write Online for 2015, which I'm hoping to attend, but your attendance has to actually be approved. And you can make lasting connections. You can also take a number of courses on data hacking, collectivism, fighting the battle online, pro analytics, building your clout, upping your social media impact, and they're taught by organizations, or they're taught by people like, Jay Godfrey, who's a conservative activist, and he built, he works for Nation Builder Online, which is basically, they will build an online political movement for you, and you have to bring the followers, but they will build the entire infrastructure for you. Michelle Malkin is, we'll talk about again, is the founder of Twitchy, which is actually a Twitter aggregation service. Jason Patorti is co-founder of Votazin, which is a company that connects registered voters via social media, so basically trains registered voters on how to be activists. And actually, I'm trying to remember which one works for Facebook now. One of these actually works for Facebook, but actually used to be high up in the Republican National Committee digital outreach campaigns. And so when you take these classes, there are parallel classes at the Netroots, sort of liberal version of this, but I think the titles aren't as kind of impactful because they don't sound quite as nefarious. And this is actually just a clip. I hope we have sound. Do we have sound?
We're called the American Liberty Tour, where we go to 18 cities. We hold presentations like this, educational seminars. We do blogger breakfast, where we connect bloggers in the cities. And then we hold Liberty rallies at night to get people fired up.
So this is
right?
from one of
the
the classes.
Fire, set them on fire. Over 2 something extraordinary. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They were activists, just like you. I truly believe that. They were activists then. We're activists now. Make no distinction about it. So what do? We become digital activists. We identify the medium, we learn the medium, we manipulate the medium. It was printing presses then, it's the internet now. That's where we influence the hearts and minds of our fellow citizens. The Tea Party's got us running up the hills. The American majority is trying to give you the tools, the muskets, right? So, here's what I do. I get on Amazon, I type in liberal books. I go through and I say 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. The flip side is that you go to conservative, libertarian, whatever, go to their products and give them 5 stars. Okay? So literally, 80% of the books I put a star on, I don't read. So that's how it works. Okay? Those are where your kids, I promise you, this is where your kids get information. Rotten Tomatoes, Flickster, those are places where you can rate movies. Okay? So when you type in movies on healthcare or documentaries on healthcare, I don't want Sicko to come up, I don't want Michael Moore to come up, so I always give it bad ratings. I spend about 30 minutes a day. So that's where the attack is. So there's a place to comment, a place to rate, right? If it's to share information, you have to do it. That's how you control the online dialogue. Give our ideas a fighting chance.
So, Right Online is a combination of funding by the Koch brothers and fees from different organizations that want to come and learn. So this is sort of, these aren't sock puppets per se, but this is also a growth industry in terms of training advocates and how to be sort of, information warriors online with, digital muskies in this case because they were patriots. So Right Online has been going on since 2008, and that's just sort of one example that I wanted to go through. How am I doing on time?
Another 20 minutes?
Another 20 minutes? Okay. And so, the other part of this, what I talked about, is because a lot of these training programs are actually conducted by people that call themselves journalists, for the most part. And this sort of political economy of the link, there are two major things that I think are critically important, and actually Gina really helped me with that I need to sort of stress this more. One is trust. So the idea that you trust your social networks, that the information that you see, I think that we all are increasingly aware that there are algorithms that affect what you see when you go on Facebook or Amazon or Netflix. But there's always, but I think that there is a sense that when you're looking at your social network feed, that it in some way reflects reality. Do most people turn on Facebook or Twitter thinking that manipulation first, newsfeed second? Anybody? Okay. So the other thing is the idea of attention. So within this networked media economy, there are so many different voices. And so how do you get attention? And so, there's always been PR stunts. There's always been political sort of stunts to get attention. But increasingly, and so a lot of these techniques that I'm talking about, you can find historical antecedents, but they have been, I think, transformed and expanded with these sort of new digital tools. So I don't want to say that all this stuff was invented in 1995, but I think that it's getting much more pronounced and it's becoming much more of an industry. And one of the people that I think is incredibly important is not Matt Drudge, but Andrew Breitbart. So how many people have heard of Andrew Breitbart? So a few of you. So in 1995, the Drudge Report was increasingly important as a news aggregator. It was really the first sort of popular news aggregator, but mainly, Matt Drudge was this guy who lived in Tampa, Florida, where he still lives. And I'm actually from right across the bay. But anyway, and he started out as an email listserv with all these different links for people to follow in terms of news stories of the day. And expanded into a website, and this young guy named Andrew Breitbart read about Drudge, and he volunteered to be his intern, basically, or he calls himself Drudge's bitch. That was what he volunteered to be. And so the Drudge Report really made headline news when it leaked this story. And so this was when sort of the Drudge Report was born. This is when it got nationwide attention, international attention, for being the prime source of information and leaking on the Monica Lewinsky-Clinton scandal. And so it was actually orchestrated not by Drudge himself, but by Andrew Breitbart, this young guy behind the scenes. And this business model is something that he's taken and applied to several other media properties. And so here's just he's actually become quite a cult figure. So this is the manipulation of the hope poster. The media class is the wall that we have to climb over for our voices to be heard. Once our voices are heard, then democracy will happen. And so in some ways sometimes he calls himself a journalist, but he constantly framed himself as attempting to sort of get over the media class, to be something new, to be something different, because the media class was dominated by this leftist political ideology. And so he also, after he left Drudge, but he is sometimes a mercenary. He also set up the Huffington Post, which was initially set up it looked almost identical to the Drudge Report. It was mainly linked with just a few editorials in 2005. But then he went on to start the Blaze, which is has anybody heard of Glenn Beck? Most people have heard of Glenn Beck. So when Glenn Beck started his online sort of campaigns, Breitbart was the brains behind that. So this is also this is from a publicity stunt that he did. Has anybody ever heard of? Probably not, but there was a conspiracy movie that came out last year that was actually shot. It was being shot while Breitbart was still alive, but P.S. he died of a heart attack in 2012. But if you go online, you'll find all these conspiracy theories that it was a left-wing conspiracy because he was the first information warrior, and the left was too scared of him, so they actually had him killed. There's no real evidence for that, but you can find a lot of conspiracy theories online. But he was part of a documentary team called the Occupy Conspiracy that basically put forward this whole theory that the global Occupy movement was actually a very carefully orchestrated front organization that was being manipulated by left-wing politicians around the world, including George Soros. And so this was part of the stunt. So he walked around the Citizens United, which is a Tea Party conference, wearing an anonymous mask. So everybody thought that left-wing activists had actually snuck in. This is one of the premiere in order to bring them. Or sorry, this is not the premiere. This is when they were launching the idea to bring them to the event. So he, in 2008, started launching his own group of sites, which were based on the sort of Drudge principle. And so this is just sort of the some of the major conservative websites online. And many of these you've never heard of, but or probably never heard of. But BigGovernment.com is his, Breitbart.com, Big Journalism. The Drudge, there was a point where 40% of all the links on Drudge would actually link to Breitbart-owned sites. And so part of what these sites are, they're just linking sites to other conservative bloggers, to major stories. But what really made them was this idea of scandal and just sort of grabbing attention and the attention economy. And so part of what I've been working on is sorry, I should backtrack a little bit. Breitbart passed away in 2012. That year, his stable of sites was registered as Breitbart LLC, and it's being continued as this corporate entity. And so many of the tactics that Breitbart has pioneered are, Breitbart, the whole Breitbart stable of sites and the Breitbart stable of activities continue to be done. And so I have the man here, but it's really the Breitbart sort of legacy that is driving these sort of forces. So trying to set the agenda through these sort of filtered links on particular subjects, trying to get them into the mainstream media, get them into aggregators to connect to the conservative blogosphere. So you might not have heard of Breitbart.com or Andrew Breitbart himself, but you've probably heard of many stories that he helped to both create and to promulgate. And so there was a phrase called "You've been Breitbarted," and Anthony Weiner. People heard of Anthony Weiner? The Breitbart stable of actors, people that he employed, were the ones who actually found the original junk photos, and I guess is that the proper? Sorry, junk photo. Underwear modeling. I don't know.
Slang.
Yes. The original, the inappropriate tweets. I should backtrack. Shirley Sherrod scandal, which wasn't probably an international story, but she was the wife of a late one of the civil rights activists, and basically Breitbart released a edited version of a video from her giving a speech, basically saying that, basically making it sound like she was afraid, she felt that she wanted to privilege black people in terms of farm subsidies in the United States, and she really hated helping white people. And so the video was heavily edited, but people moved fast, she lost her job, it was a huge scandal in the United States. There was also Fistgate, and so that was basically when Kevin Jennings, Secretary of Education, a big scandal. Basically, there was a video that was released that was heavily edited, basically insinuating that he was promoting the sexual practice of fisting, so that's why it was called Fistgate. And so these are just some highlights, but there's quite a few more. So Monica Lewinsky was sort of the first scandal. Not that Monica Lewinsky wasn't a real thing, but some of these are actually real and some of them are not. But a lot of it is to drive traffic, to drive these stories into the mainstream before they're checked, and oftentimes with very real consequences. And I'm just going to show you a video. So one of his mentees, James O'Keefe, who started his own company called Veritas Cinema, was responsible for this series of videos.
ACORN is the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. ACORN has goals including the registration of new voters and the advocacy of affordable housing, especially in the inner cities. Scenario: a young woman pretending to be a prostitute and a man pretending to run for Congress one day walk into ACORN's Baltimore headquarters and speak with two of the employees who run the facility, Tanja Thompson, a tax specialist, and a woman by the name of Shira, who is an ACORN housing employee. The young woman, pretending to be the prostitute, says she wants to traffic into the United States a dozen underage girls from El Salvador and wants assistance obtaining a housing loan for a brothel, getting around federal tax laws, and helping to launder the sex money into the man's future congressional campaign. Question: would the ACORN employees encourage the prostitute to cheat on her taxes by getting child tax credit for the underage girls?
Under 16? Yeah. So are you be able to get child tax credit?
Would they give her guidance on how not to get busted by the federal government?
You're not going to use all that.
And would they give her street tactics on how not to get in trouble with her abusive pimp?
Be careful. Train them to keep their mouth shut. Always keep the eyes in the back of your head. Put the pressure on and I can't find it.
Yes, yes, and yes.
These are both James O'Keefe, both listening.
Is it against the law in Maryland? Prostitution?
Anything that the government saying money from is always against the law.
Well, it's not on specifically. This is, I think, of course, they always call the law for cops on us, the board.
Right, and anything that's, anything that's in Maryland, anything that's in the government approved is always against the law. That's rule number one.
Yeah.
What you going to do, you collect taxes.
Okay, so it's more of the same. But, so basically James O'Keefe and Veritas Visuals, which is actually doing a booming business now, by the way, at the time, Breitbart paid Veritas Visuals to go in and to do these videos. And because, James O'Keefe is an investigative journalist, and we can talk about whether you think he's an investigative journalist or not. And they were heavily edited, released on the Veritas Visuals YouTube page, and then linked from all the Breitbart sites. Then Drudge links to the Breitbart sites, and then all of a sudden, this is national news because President Obama had strong links to ACORN and had worked as a community organizer for ACORN in the past. And one of his major donors was, or one of his major supporters was actually the head of ACORN. So this is sort of a similar pattern that goes on and on and on. And even after this is actually from September 2014. One of the things I've had one of my GRAs do is to go through the stable of Breitbart sites and to catalog all the different articles that have the word scandal in them. And anything that's actually initiated on almost all the articles that are actually initiated on the Breitbart stable sites have something scandal or scandal-like in the headlines, because it's clickbait, right? These are clickbait sort of coverage. And so Breitbart has had an amazing impact, even though he died. And I actually started looking at this around 2012, and I felt really sad that Breitbart died, because why does everything bad happen to me? Because I really wanted to talk to him, because he's not ashamed. He was not ashamed. He wrote a book called Righteous Indignation, where he outlines a lot of the sort of his thinking on these activities, because he sees himself. I mean, yes, he wants to make money, and yes, but he's not aiming to be News Corporation. He's not aiming to be Disney. He has a very specific political agenda. He calls himself, or he had a very specific political agenda. And it's actually interesting that I think it's almost a Freudian slip that I talk about him like he's still alive, because in many ways I think that his legacy is very much alive. And so now you have a number of sort of baby Breitbarts that are operating similar sort of organizations. And Project Veritas, which is James O'Keefe's project, is been incredibly successful. You can go and you can donate to a site, you can join the cause, you can be involved in investigative journalism. Michelle Malkin, who is probably best known for being a conservative, non-white commentator on Fox News, but she has a number of different businesses. This is not a, there's almost no stories of her own on this site. It's a Twitter aggregation. She calls it a Twitter aggregation site. So basically what she does is she finds shocking headlines that are put into Twitter and then links to them. And she also has her own internet, what she calls her internet broadcast network called Hot Air, that she also launched. And these are just two different examples, but many other of the Breitbart sort of proteges have a second job working for organization or working at events like Right Online, training activists. So this is just an example. This is just one snapshot from the Twitter feed that was going on from Right Online 2013, talking about what Michelle Malkin was talking to, the tips she was giving the audience. So pay close attention to what you're saying online, see how that drives offline traffic, be everywhere on social media, learn the nuances, know when silver bullet exists, but address pop culture as a way to pull in. But these are just a few sort of examples and how this sort of filters out from these sort of Right Online conferences beyond. And so what I think is significant is that oftentimes James O'Keefe is an investigative journalist. Michelle Malkin is a journalist / media entrepreneur. Breitbart was a journalist. That was the title that he's often given. I don't think that these people should be considered journalists. I think that they're something else. They're something different. They're sort of I think scary representatives of this new sort of hybrid activity of political communication online. They are information warriors, and I think that oftentimes when this is just one sort of set of case studies, but I know that I only had an hour or half an hour to really talk about that. But you can find sort of corollaries on the left and the right. And one of my other frustrations that oftentimes, because I think it's important to look at the left as well as the right, because I think oftentimes, we just look at the right and we say, look, they're doing all this stuff and it's lies. And then we look at the left and we don't look at them. We don't look at how these organizations are actually evolving and expanding, and what these organizations are doing and how they're being used. So the ones that I've talked about today, I think, are much more insidious. And the previous presentation, I talked about some of the ones that were insidious and some that it's always easy to point fingers at organizations as insidious when they don't necessarily follow your own political agenda. But just FYI, this does not follow my political agenda. But so I'm interested in sort of hearing feedback, because I'm really trying to map out the range of different actors. And so this is just sort of one area and one set of case studies. So thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
Good start. So you sort of concluded by saying that most of these examples involve conservative groups, and that liberals might do it too. But none of your examples were actually about liberals. Since you know the industry,
Right.
do you think most of this is actually about conservatives and liberals might do it, but at 100th the scale or 10th the scale?
Well, I think that one of the things is that I think that the language is different, But if you look at, there are a number of organizations that have arisen to promote and to help and to be consultants for things like protesters on the vein of Occupy Wall Street. So how do you get your message out? You know, we are multimedia digital consultants that help you get your message across different medias. How do you get attention? So the techniques aren't necessarily all that different. Although the sort of gotcha journalism, I think, is definitely sort of unique to the right, particularly in the United States. But and I should say that the Breitbart LLC is actually expanding they just opened their offices in London, and they're actually planning on expanding globally. So it'll be interesting to watch how that unfolds. So lucky Europe, Breitbart is on its way. But I do think that a lot of the techniques and the sort of business practices are similar in the sense that we have many more hybrid organizations that, you know, are they NGOs or are they media makers? Are they, you know, but the NGOs the NGOs as newsmakers are looked at with a different brush, because most, I think, academics are not as sympathetic to sort of the Breitbart cause as the many global NGO causes. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would like to break in with this. It reminds me a lot of what George Marshall is doing at Talking Points Memo, or what Kofi is doing. I mean, that's our liberal counterparts. TPM also started as a link aggregator mostly, but they try to get the dirt on the other side with the muckraker side, and they have their like army of bloggers and activists that will link and like or unlike everything accordingly. And I guess cost is sort of similar. And maybe one step removed from this is they don't send out O'Keeffe's to provoke people, but encourage people, like Mother Jones with the famous Romney video, like encourage people to send in secretly recorded video that works in the same provocative way.
And I mean, the macaca video is sort of the most famous example in the U.S. But I mean, there are definitely gotcha videos that are then leaked online, and it's not. I think that was much more sort of campaign focused in the sense that the tracker that tracked what was his name, Alan West, was actually was directly employed by the opposing politician, and then it was leaked online. But yeah, I mean, so you can find similar examples. It's just sort of the industry side of it is a little bit is shaped a little bit differently.
The Romney 49% video, 42% video, that was just a video by
a
random bartender or something who sent it to Mother Jones that blasted with that.
But I think also part of if you're looking at the U.S. in particular, there's always been a general sense that the left is better at online than the right, and the right has really, I think, rallied around the sort of idea, the Breitbart sort of approach, because they saw it as sort of the answer to the MoveOn.org model of directly linking citizens and politicians. So I think that what interests me most is this idea of the media, the new media, the network media environment as the intermediary. So, there's been astroturfing for a very long time, and Phil has done great work and can probably speak about that all day long. But astroturfing for me, or the traditional sort of understanding of astroturfing, is much more about linking politicians, at least with the perception that they're directly linking with grassroots activists. And so this is more about manipulating the online media agenda as the critical intermediary. And so I think it's in some ways more of a convoluted sort of activity.
I have a really, So more about the first part of your presentation. It was fascinating, and I think I have a few questions that are related. So one is, what is the point of this all? Is, I guess, the overarching theme. So what is it good for? Having fake followers, for example. Like, it might sound pretty obvious why you would want to have a lot of followers, because it shows that you're popular and your message gets out there. But at the end of the day, if 92% of your followers are fake, then where does your message get to? Does it have to do with the algorithms? So your message gets out there more because it seems like you have a lot of followers. If so, do we expect algorithms to change now that we have these mechanisms to have a lot of fake followers, to either filter for that or just to filter it in to the algorithm? And the other questions are related. It seems like authenticity is one of the capitals of the social media, that the message may not be checked by professionals as thoroughly as it would be in a proper newspaper, but it's more authentic. It comes, it's bottom up, etc., etc. But again, with all this going on, do we think that this capital, authenticity, will be considered as less of the nature of social media? So again, it's changing the whole nature of why we're using social media, why we would want to use that as politicians. And the third is, again, related to this. So we talk a lot about niche audiences and how the left is talking to the left and the right is talking to the right, especially on the online sphere. So what is the point of this? Is there any literature on whether it helps mobilize? Do information coming through these channels, these really problematic channels, does it get to mainstream media? I know the Monica Lewinsky case did get, obviously, but these fake ones. So is there an impact that would justify or that would make a point? So I think the overarching thing is like, what is the point?
Okay, I agree with you. I think that authenticity is increasingly a problem. The FCC actually just announced that it was launching a social pollution study of ways in which they call it social pollution online, ways in which to get rid of social pollution online. Whether that comes with anything is another question. And so the question of why, so it basically depends on the medium or on the platform. But in general, so I think that there are multiple reasons why you might want fake Twitter followers. One is the perception of popularity. The other is that many of these sock puppet followers, they will actually retweet your tweets, which raises your hashtag. Which if you're doing a search for a particular attention, you can raise the profile of a particular issue. So in that way, you can manipulate. And Twitter and Facebook are constantly trying to think of ways in which to sort of crack down on this authenticity problem. And Instagram's actually just announced that they're going to have, Twitter has verified accounts, verified as X and Y. And Instagram actually just announced that it's going to have verified profiles as well. So I think that authenticity is increasingly important. I think there's always going to be new ways to sort of game the system. How many times have you gotten somebody who is not a real person following you because they want to raise their profile? And then there's plenty of people who will follow you. Somebody follows me, I'll follow them back. And so there are also people who will market getting real in ways in which to get real people to follow them. So the market, expands. I think that there's plenty of these sort of attempts that don't necessarily work. Trying to get attention online, to get attention offline, to have real political impact. They don't necessarily always work. And so, but my focus is not necessarily on the extent to which these information warrior tactics actually influence audiences, and I think that it's not that I don't think that that's important, but my focus is really trying to get a handle on mapping this sort of nascent industry, because I think that until we know what we're talking about, until we sort of identify what these organizations are doing, what sort of services that they're marketing, and what the commonalities and what the differences are across these sort of different kinds of service, that I don't think that we can understand it fully. Because sometimes it's not necessarily about popularity or getting into the mainstream media. It's about it's about a back and forth between left and right, say in the United States, or a particular set of very interested actors that follow a particular set of news sources very closely. And so if you can get the right people online to pay attention, now that I was talking about right online, I realized, but I mean the right people online, not right online, then that is important. And then to move outward and then to think about the motivations for political actors using these services, and the motivations are the impact of constituents consuming this. But it's not that I don't think that that question is really important, but it's not my current question, if that makes sense. I don't want to sidestep your question, but. So Kate?
No, I was thinking about, as to your last point about just how do you understand what's going on out there as a first step, the mapping exercise piece you were talking about. And just, I was thinking about, the question you asked in terms of how do you start distinguishing some of the different things that are going on. And it seems like there's different categories that you probably already are, but that I would think you need to create. So on one hand, there's the types of organizations. Is it industry? Is it a nonprofit? Like, how are they structured? Which is also about self-identification in one hand, whether it's service delivery, like a marketing or PR agency, or whether they are couching themselves in a greater good kind of ethos as a nonprofit, for example. But that really is in a way, that can be a structural question, because we know.
Well, welcome to the last 3 months of
right.
I have many different typologies and ones that are like crossed out, but yeah. Absolutely.
But I think it seems really key, and I'm sure you're doing this and it's a very obvious point, but to distinguish between the kind of structural issues and maybe the mission is a separate one, but then also the tactics. Because it seems like, and I know you're doing that, but
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so I was really focusing more on some of the tactics today, but the typology is something that has been consuming me, and so, but one of the things that I've come to is that it's very hard to create boxes, just like it's increasingly hard to say that that person's a PR professional, that person's a journalist, and that person works for an NGO, because these sort of roles are blurring. And so
but that's a more interesting finding. It's not finding to put things in a box.
I'm presenting it more as a spectrum. There's people who vary from the ideologically committed, that this is, they're just finding a way to eat while they pursue their causes, to people thinking like, who just kind of enjoy trolling for fun, and they pay for it, and it's. Sorry.
No, it makes sense. The point I wanted to get to regarding tactics was something that I could see, maybe something you could draw out even more, which is I don't know if this is the best way of putting it. Not positive and negative, because it's not right, but the kind of tactics that are about, the different ways, whether they're a little sleazy, legitimate, strategic, whatever, that are about promoting your stuff, as opposed to the tactics that are just pure manipulation. I think that's a very, very huge difference. And then there's all the nuances within that, and the different ways, and the different types of words, and all these other things on your spectrum. But I think that is, to me, that's a huge difference. Like, it's one thing to have these, to out people when there's malfeasance, or to do, savvy, again, whether it's a little sleazy or not, marketing and PR that's sophisticated using algorithms and yada. But it's so different from, again, the fake profiles, or manipulation of this whole space of, user participation. That breaks down this whole model of how we're supposed to be engaging online, and the openness of the internet. If there's so much manipulation that goes on, I think that's a really significant piece. I'd love to see that even more.
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. This whole idea. That's one of my sort of ideas in terms of spectrum, from like self-promotion of a particular cause that you believe in, to pure manipulation. If I understood your sort of dichotomy correctly.
Yeah, that on one hand, again, with all the gray areas, acknowledged.
But I mean, in some ways, though, it's hard, even when you're doing interviews, to sort of assign somebody. This guy gets 7 on the manipulation scale. It's in many ways hard to.
And I mean, more from a qualitative standpoint, than how you.
Oh no, absolutely.
I don't envy that, but just as a defining kind of, but that it's very different things going on. And I think to the bigger question of what does this all mean, that David was getting at, the significance of how this levels of the more manipulative pieces, and that are change. Again, I think that has a huge impact on the changing nature of the participatory and open nature of the internet. And I think that as part of the answer to the why this matters in a way that's bigger than any particular cause or campaign or what have you.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Gina?
So this is a multi-layered question, but it follows up on Kate's comment, which is, in many ways what's great about your work is it's phenomenologically bound. So you've got the institutions and the actors and what's going on, rather than necessarily picking apart the processes. And I want to just push you a little bit to also think about and clarify for yourself, because it's in there, the technological platforms as one of the kind of key socio-technical actors in your story.
Yeah.
And by that, I then tap into work on algorithmic journalism. So this idea that you're already bringing in about how the link has changed and the aggregation has changed, what gets circulated. That's independent of whether or not these particular actors are trying to influence for good, bad, or journalistic evil purposes, right? That's a changing process, and so the norms and cultures around that process are in flux.
Which is why I really like Phil Napoli's work on the sort of the shadow audience.
Absolutely, and there's all this great, there's all of this great stuff that's coming out that is there. Chris Anderson's work on, basically adapting Hudson and Bourdieu for algorithmic journalism, right? So there's different norms that journalists who we all in this room would consider journalists, quad-journalists, are mapping and thinking about, right? And then the sort of politics of the flag. So Gillespie and Crawford and their work on kind of ordinary people who are using flagging content on Facebook as a way to intervene in particular social movements, right? That's not these people, but it is enabled by the same technological platform, right? And then, work on work that was done on people both opposed to the war in Iraq and supporters for the war in Iraq using YouTube flagging for the same purpose, right? So Operation Takedown and work that's in IJOC on, the ways in which people both independently, user-generated warfare was the term there. So these are practices that are at once rooted in a set of professional media experiences, but very much about piecing together a set of practices that are happening all over. And I would love to see you I think you can situate this work into something that is there. I heard a bit of that contextualization in the other talk, but I actually think if you take a step back from the roles that people are playing, is it journalism or not, and you go into these socio-technical platforms and the practices instead, then you end up with new kinds of identification of roles, new kinds of identification of categories, etc. Right?
No, and I think that's actually I've been doing on the literature, but that's sort of like a placeholder section right now.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you.
And that's where I think what you've got is really novel for the field, right? I think that's where you're going to have an intervention that's actually bigger than just political communication. Not just, but you know what I'm saying. I actually think it's going to have that kind of role. I suspect, and I would love your feedback on, that the data-drivenness of the ways in which people get their news and information is a huge actor in this phenomenon. So knowing the number of times a tweet has circulated, seeing the number of Facebook likes is both constituted and constitutive of, a set of practices that feed into the manipulation of that. So it sounds like your actors are super sophisticated about that process, but that process is being put in play in part through this attention to algorithmic journalism, right?
Absolutely, and I think that goes back to sort of this idea of the political economy of the link, because it's not necessarily about driving people to your site for advertising, but in some ways it's the the rush of seeing 3,000 Facebook likes or 3,000 retweets or getting a link, and then eventually getting a link in the right place. And so it's half. I think it's half sort of the algorithmic journalism, the trends that algorithmic journalism helps to unleash, but also the perception of data. The perception of the idea that data equals power, links equals power. I think is really important, at least for this sort of group that I'm looking at. But I mean, I think that there's also been work that's been looked at in the sense that how the media industries in general are reacting to data, and how in a sense that it gives the fiction about the reality, control of that you are actually, it's concretizing the audience. It's making them real because you can count them now. And so there's, we went through this period where we didn't know where people were watching anything or doing anything, and everybody was like, oh, where are we going to advertise? And the whole media industry is going to collapse. And now you know that, I mean, you at least can tell yourself that that X number of people watch this show on Hulu, and then X number of people watch this show on Netflix, and then they moved, and then they tweeted about it. And, there's these cross-platform indexes, and this whole preoccupation now with big data. And so, it's about reclaiming, reconcretizing the audience and the consumer. And I think that holds true to the relationship between these sort of actors and constituents as well. And so it's also something to market.
And the political use of those numbers, and that gets back to your question, like, what is it good for? What's the point of having all these fake followers? I'm sure you saw it was he wrote a piece on the Monkey Cage blog last week about his research with Daniel Kreis about how the 2012 presidential election campaigns used Twitter, and that whole study raised an interesting point about this being a question I like about using these social media as a way to mobilize your whole broader constituency and your activists, and as a way to get to journalists. Those two things are increasingly intermingled, and how it's important who perceives it as what, because what I thought interesting finding of that piece was that the journalists looked at Twitter as an indicator of which way the masses of users were going. And they based a lot of stories already halfway through the first debate about how Obama was losing, because the whole Twitter was trending against him, so it was proof that he was losing. So it's this perception of Twitter as like, it's easy for the journalists to get to the pulse of the nation. And the campaigns were a step ahead of that, because they knew that the main use of Twitter is to get to the journalists, and the main actors, the main important actors for them was the journalists. So they,
somebody actually did you see the study on this, on the Romney Obama?
Yeah. It got a lot of newspaper because the headline was anyway that the Romney campaign needed 22 people to approve on every single tweet. But the more interesting finding was that both campaigns saw Twitter not as a way to reach their constituencies, but as a way to influence journalists and use the retweets purely as a message, as a means for that. They had prepared over 200 infographics to send out at the right moment. Purely, they saw this elite platform for journalists. That was so it wasn't about how many people, how many eyeballs you got, but how many reporters would write about your tweets afterwards.
No, absolutely. And part of the reason that they concluded that Romney won the Twitter war is because Romney had this huge group that was actually controlling the media conversation during the debate, and the Obama team didn't get on until 30 minutes after the debate ended. And so by that time, the war of who won was already lost on social media because there was enough. And so there's always a step about how the left is better, but I think that's more popular.
That's interesting. If it gets more significant, these fake followers, etc., and then this information of how many, who's trending how, is going to get even more twisted because it's going to be harder to read.
The manipulative value, I guess, especially on this point in time where the perception is skewed, because it worked at that moment because the campaigns already knew that they could use it as a means to get to journalists, but journalists still saw it as a way to get the pulse of the nation. And it's only because of this disconnect that the war succeeded. If journalists become more savvy in that sense of becoming aware of the information pollution, then maybe that wouldn't be as successful anymore a strategy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hope that you're right.
Actually, that leads me to ask, I myself just commenting, also have a question. In the beginning you said you were also looking at global. The examples you got of the United States, but it seemed like the whole issue of Russian information warfare and pro-Russian trolls flooding every article that is critical of Putin seems...
Yeah, and ISIS is another case study. Sort of the group of organizations that have surrounded the most recent, the rise of ISIS on both sides. Al-Qaeda's online media network is something else that I've been looking at. They use a very similar range of tactics, even though it's very different geopolitical circumstances. But it has evolved. Their jihadist media organizations are they're media organizations, and they're only new media for the most part. So.
It's just how interesting it is that the role of numbers, and it just makes me think of Austin's idea of the importance of measuring crowds at protests, and the war that follows a protest about measuring how many people turned up, and the same goes on with Facebook. And how many people indicate that they would go, and in advance of an event, that raises obviously the profile of an event. For example, and this goes back to Jost's point about the importance of another intermediary, the journalist. The recent Hungarian protests got a lot of coverage in the media before they happened because there were so many likes and people who indicated they would go. So I think there was this, obviously, there was this running effect where a lot of people indicated, then even more people indicated, then it got into the media that, oh my God, it's happening, and already so how many people indicated they would go, and that got it even more rolling. So again, just the war of numbers and the importance of numbers, and not just the virtual numbers, but actually, again, back to Austin's thing.
Yeah.
Actually, how many people turn up,
and I mean, I think it would be interesting to think that if that many of those people were fake, but nobody would have the time or the wherewithal to check to make sure that those were all real when they were doing the story about how 4 million people or whatever planned to show up at the Hungarian internet protest, but nobody's going to stop and say, that's actually only 1.5 million, and 2.5 million were fake. And so, part of it is the rapidity with which the news cycle and with which journalists are forced to sort of make these judgment calls and use social media as a proxy for public opinion. So absolutely, I think it's a great point.
Fabulous. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.